perspective is about whether or not the COVID thing is just a temporary phenomenon, or whether it will have changes that are long-term and permanent in the local food systems. You know, given everything that we've heard about all these massive infections and.
I think that there are two possible outcomes of this. And on my most optimistic days, I think people like me have been praying for Americans to start cooking again, and they're cooking again clearly, and they're liking it. And, they're going to their local farms. And on my best days, I think, oh, this is great. People are sitting down to family meals, which they didn't used to do. All that. On my more pessimistic days, I think what will happen in this probably year or year and a half that we'll be going through this, 40 years of work on sustainability will go out the window. Small farms will fail, independent restaurants will fail, and we will live in a world of industrialized food, and most Americans won't care. And one thing I know for sure is that one of those two things will happen. We will never go back to where we were. What this pandemic is doing is changing forever the way America eats and cooks. We are finally seeing what the consequences of what American food policy since World War II has been. At the end of World War II, the government decided that as part of the Cold War, we would have the cheapest food in the world. And we do. Americans spend less on their food than any other nation in the world. And the consequences of that, we are finally seeing in this pandemic, in the concentration of everything, the industrialization of everything. And, before we knew that it was degrading the environment and making us ill, and, that it was the cheap food that's, means that, 6 out of 10 Americans have chronic diseases and so we knew that. What I don't think most Americans realized before this is that we've made a dangerous food system. That, the way we pack meat, the way the farm workers work, that the result of this cheap food is in this moment being revealed as really problematic, and it's a food security issue. And I think, you can't turn away from it anymore.
No, but it's an equity issue too, right? And when you think about the way racial equity, a lot of the workers in these plants are people of color, and it's just, again, surfaced the kind of, I don't know if it's white supremacy or what, but it's a built-in inequity that's in the system that's allowed this system to be so cheap.
Oh, absolutely. The entire American food system has worked off undocumented labor for years.
Yeah.
And or exploited labor. And what we've seen in the packing plants, we're starting to see now in the fields. There's a huge crisis brewing in among the farm workers now.
Yeah.
That hasn't been really documented the way meat packing plants have, but will be in the next few weeks.
My own household, I come from a long line of chefs. Okay, so my father's he's just passed away, but was a terrific cook. I'm just a mediocre cook, and my wife's a better cook than I am. But we are now cooking. I think we're cooking better meals at home than we can eat in restaurants, and not the high end restaurants. Okay, I'll grant you that, but.
I think Americans everywhere are understanding that. As they go to visit their farmers and they come home with fresh food, starting to understand that so much of cooking isn't technique, it's shopping.
It's shopping, yeah.
And they can get great things if they support their local food supply.
That's a great insight, because I'm trying to think about what could we do as Heifer, what could we do through our operation in the United States. We have this, as I said, we've got this ranch and we've got processing plants, and literally we have the fully integrated processing And I don't think we've really promoted the whole idea that you've just suggested of cooking at home, of course, but this idea that it's about shopping. Yeah, it's about shopping. And,
well, you just said something that I think is really important, because you said you have processing. And
yeah.
one of the things that we're really starting to see is that what we lack at local levels are processors.
Yeah.
And one of the ways we could really help farmers is help them process their food, freeze it, can it, make jams out of it, so that they have a year-round income.
Yeah, and infrastructure, right? This is what you're talking about, the infrastructure. This is what we're doing all over the world, just so you know. We're actually saying the only way the smallholder farmer will be independent is to have access to an infrastructure that allows them to actually add value to their product.
Yes, and I think, that's something that we're also starting to see in this pandemic, that is really needed.
You're famous as a restaurant critic and more. So because of COVID, a lot of restaurants are going belly up or stopped buying everything else. And that, of course, is a major market for smallholder farmers, right? The local markets and everything else.
Yes.
Do you think that's going to come back, or how is that? I mean, I know I want to go back to your original thought, but that piece of it is really important.
It's really frightening, and it's one reason why so many restaurateurs are doing takeout, because they're trying to keep their suppliers in business. And it's not farmers, fishermen. 85% of all the seafood eaten in America is eaten in restaurants.
Yeah.
Fishermen, the lobstermen 85%. Are in terrible trouble. Yeah. The cheesemakers are in terrible trouble because so much cheese gets sold in restaurants. And so one of the real questions is, can farms, can artisans pivot to selling directly to consumers? And that is going to be the big tipping point for all of these farmers. And what you see is that some people have done a really good job at creating an online business and a local business, and some haven't. And the ones that haven't are going to be in trouble down the road, because there's no question that 2 years from now, we're going to have a lot fewer independent restaurants than we have now.
Really?
I mean, there's no question that a lot of these restaurants are not going to come back.
Right.
I mean, part of it is just, the government response. They can open, then they have to close. I'm working on this documentary about this moment. And, restaurateurs in LA, they were told they could open, and then suddenly they had an hour to close again. And a lot of those chefs are just saying,
Well, what are they going to do? What are they going to do after that? I mean, are they going to go and become tech people, or what are they going to do?
There are many, many people, thousands of them, tens of thousands of them, asking themselves that very question at the moment. Some of them will, become private chefs. Some of them will, start making jams. There's this whole new business that's grown up of sort of boxes of food. Half prepared food, you get the raw ingredients and you get the sauces. And I think that's a big part of America's future. And that will save a lot of small farmers. But I think one of the other things that's happening is, as people connect to their farmers, and I mean, you're seeing that everywhere. I mean, CSA boxes. I mean, people are very happily going, out into their communities and meeting their farmers. And I think you're going to see that farmers and artisans, cheesemakers, bread bakers are going to have the same kind of notoriety that chefs had. I mean, they have not been sufficiently paid attention to. It's all, I mean, as I said earlier, so much of cooking is shopping. And we've ignored the people who are actually producing this wonderful food.
I'm a European. I was born, but it's so it's a little bit going back to Europe. Where you've got the local village and the artisans and the local cheese and local milk and of course the local wine, right? I mean, I'm thinking France more than any other country.
But I mean, it's also going back to America. I mean, And going into World War II, a quarter of the entire American population was engaged in farming.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I grew up, there was a dairy down the street from where I grew up.
Yeah.
And we got milk from the local dairy people. We got produce from the local people. I mean, this was an agrarian society.
Mm.
Get that, but because we industrialized so quickly. I mean, after World War II, it happened with remarkable speed, the changes. And so, you know, many people don't remember that, but we once ate locally, and we need to go back to that.
Yeah, you know, you're kind of depressing me a little bit about the fact that restaurants are not going to reopen. Now, we live in Atlanta, Georgia, but we go to New York. We used to go to New York relatively frequently, and one of our favorite restaurants was Prune. You know, I'm sure you know it. And she wrote an incredible essay in the New York Times about how she was quitting. You know, I almost cried, and I was thought to myself, well, why didn't she stop? And she's got such a reputation, she should be able to find the capital to start over at some point.
Well, yes, except that one of the things that we're also realizing in this pandemic is that the restaurant model, as we know it in America, is not tenable. I mean, the idea that most restaurants had enough to keep going for like 2 weeks.
No.
And a restaurant like Prune, with one of the most famous chefs in America, could not survive for a few weeks once this pandemic hit, does not speak very well for the business model. And,
no, it doesn't. You're right.
And clearly that is going to have to change. I mean, we are going to have to pay more when we go to restaurants. You know, you go to a restaurant in France and you're shocked by the prices. Well, you're shocked by the prices because you're paying what it really costs. And, you know, I do think that there will be a lot of restaurants will close, and a lot of the places I love best will probably never come back. I mean, you know, Blackbird in Chicago closed. I mean, that is one of everybody who cares about food, America's favorite restaurants, and it's gone. And there will be lots more like that. But 2 years down the road, what you're going to see is rent prices will come down. One of the things that's really killed restaurants has been the greed of landlords who just jacked up prices to ridiculous. I think Americans will be willing to actually pay what it costs. I mean, as Americans go to farms and realize what food actually costs if you're buying good food, that it's expensive. And I think they'll be willing to pay more for restaurants. And I think you will see a whole slew of wonderful, creative, young chefs open restaurants.
Yeah.
You know, 6 months after this pandemic is over.
Maybe when we have a vaccine or something, when it feels much safer. Yeah.
I think there will be a wild spate of creativity, and it'll be very exciting.
Yeah. That's much more encouraging. Yeah, no, it's just, so the, you know, again, you're very steeped in all this. How could we, for example, we as an organization or other organization, influence the FDA? Because the FDA is a huge, important player in all this, right? I mean, you said policy, but it can be changed, right? Not right now, perhaps, because of the leadership that we have, but.
Well, you know, it's so complicated because, you know, one of the people I talk to regularly for this documentary I'm working on is a cattleman in Kansas. And, you know, he just says, you know, what is happening to them is unconscionable. I mean, the meat packers are making all the money. The people who raise the cattle are not. And he says, you know, the problem is that all of our politicians they're paid off. I mean, the agribusiness lobby is huge. And one thing we have to do is end Citizens United. I mean, we've got to get money out of government. But more importantly than that, what you can do as an organization, what we can all do, is understand the power of people. I mean, we didn't end smoking, you know, cigarettes because the government decided to ban cigarettes. It happened because kids went home to their parents and said, "You're going to die if you keep smoking." the power of the consumer is enormous. I mean,
Yeah.
when consumers, ordinary consumers, decided that they didn't want to eat eggs from tortured hens, they persuaded all the fast food, McDonald's and all those companies, to say they weren't going to use eggs from battery chickens anymore. We have that power, and we have to use it. We have to leverage consumer power. It's really potent.
It is potent. Yeah, I was just thinking about the tomato situation also in Florida.
In Florida, the Immokalee workers.
Immokalee,
that happened because people said
yeah.
fast food places, we don't want to eat tomatoes that are picked by slaves.
Right. So what's the key message you would say to consumers around all this? What would be the framing or the narrative here?
I would say pay attention to food. I mean, just really pay attention, understand what this system is, and agree that you're willing to pay what food actually costs. I think that's the biggest message. When you are buying directly from farmers, you are actually paying what it costs. You are not. The reason that we have all this cheap food is because all the wrong things are being subsidized by the government. And part of it is, we're addicted to this cheap food. And, I think we have to make certain sacrifices, and we have to agree that maybe we will buy one fewer pair of shoes.
Yeah, right.
And pay more for a chicken. I mean, these are choices we make.
Yeah.
10 years ago, if you had said that everybody in America, or practically the world, would agree to pay $100 a month to have a little computer in their hand, an iPhone, you would have said that's crazy. Nobody's going to do that. They can't afford it. Well, guess what?
They found it. No, of course, no question. The value is so high. Yeah.
And if we agree to pay more for tomatoes, then we can pay the pickers more. We can pay them a fair wage.
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, it really does come down to income inequality. I mean, that's sort of the basis of everything.
Yeah.
And we have to agree that, farming in America is an insane business. I mean, most small farmers have side businesses.
They have to.
They have to. Well, look at that. That's wrong. On the face of it, that's wrong. Farming is really hard.
Yeah, we've actually organized our co-op so that we are not guaranteeing, that's the wrong word, but we've organized the pricing so that farmers can expect, if they farm well, they have to work for it, of course, a $40,000 net per year. All right, that's not a very high compensation, but at least it's a net of some significance. It's not $10,000. But we've taken that point and actually said, okay, we translate it into action. What does it actually mean when we source our chickens, our beef, our pork, et cetera, et cetera? We're saying, if you do this right at this scale, a couple of acres, then you can earn $40,000.
And I think that's one of the things that's happening in this pandemic. My son is 30, and he and his partner are sort of looking around and thinking, maybe farming is like a good life. Maybe we're looking in the wrong places.
Yeah.
Can I tell you something else that's really
sure.
one of the more encouraging things I've discovered in this? I mean, I'm thinking these days a lot about foraging, and I'm sure you know about chaos farming, people who have cover crops, and but one of the more innovative things that's come out of this moment is the state of Connecticut is actually paying kelp farmers to seed their kelp farms all along the coast of Connecticut with clams and mussels, so that people can just come and forage them for free. And,
wow.
Part of one of the things that I think could come out of this is just this notion of what you can get from the wild if we encourage it.
Yeah. If there's enough wild around, right? I think that's a wonderful kind of solution there.
that idea that you would just see,
Yeah.
Seafood and say to people, there it is, go out and get it.
Yeah.
And, we're watching, as everything closes down, we're watching the environment clean itself up and
Right.
come back, and, people can fish. And, there's something about this new connection to food that we're having, which is really nice. And, and the idea that the people in the Midwest who are growing things that are only meant to be eaten by animals, but who are now then sowing food in the middle of their soy fields, a couple acres of real food that then goes to food banks. And, another thing that's really happening in this pandemic is that a lot of the farmers that I am speaking to are for the first time connecting to food banks in ways that they never were able to before.
Yeah.
And that's a really hopeful new source of income.
Yeah, no, I think we about a third of our production goes to food banks. That's our mission, to end poverty and hunger. So that's a pretty natural thing for us to do. But I think I heard your answer regarding the FDA. But I'm wondering, we have, through a variety of connections, we have access to the FDA. Which piece of for example, there was a question raised is that should we be asking the FDA, for example, to relax its regulations on all of the inspections that they have for smallholder farmers? Because those can be onerous, right? They can be almost debilitating because of the bureaucracy. It's easy for a large operation to handle. They'll have, a couple of lawyers on board and they'll handle it. But for a smallholder farmer who's, turning over soil, that's...
The amount of time that goes to bureaucracy and paperwork generally throughout the society, I think is insane.
Yeah.
And yes, of course the FDA should be relaxing those, just as the USDA should make it possible for there to be more regional slaughterhouses.
Yeah.
The idea that slaughterhouses are concentrated the way they are among 4 huge international corporations is crazy. 50 years ago, there were small slaughterhouses in every community in America. And that would completely change the way meat is sold in this country. And it would be a fantastic thing if they change those regulations to make it possible for, small slaughterhouses to exist. So yes, of course, so many of those regulations are now written essentially by agribusiness to benefit them. And we need to rewrite all of those things so they benefit small farmers. We really have to privilege small farmers. Just as, the Farm Bill is generally written by agribusiness for their benefit.
Tyson. By Tyson and the American Cattle Association.
And it's crazy. We really, that's a place we really could have an impact and make a change.
Yeah, I think we need to sort of step up our game a little bit. Certainly at the state level to begin with, because we're quite small. But I think maybe we can move up to the federal level at some point. Yeah.
But this is an amazing moment because there are so many bills in Congress. It's like every day there's, some senator or representative is introducing a new bill to help whatever piece of agriculture impacts their state.
Yeah.
So, there's the CARES Act and, they all have wonderful names.
But, of course, yeah.
But, I think there's a real understanding now that if we don't help farmers, if the government doesn't help small farmers, there's going to be hell to pay in this country.
So I'm going to switch subjects on you completely, okay? But to tap into your expertise. So what do you think is going to be the next hot trend in terms of cuisine from somewhere else that Americans might enjoy?
Really interesting question. And of course, a particularly interesting question in this particular moment in time, because we have always followed immigration trends. Right?
Ah,
So if you wanted to know where to look for the next trend, you look to, who's coming into the country. The thing that we're probably most ignorant about, given the size of the Latinx population in this country, is we know so little about, regional Mexican food. I mean, Mexican food is truly one of the most complicated and interesting cuisines that there is, and we know almost nothing. We mostly know
right.
Mex food.
Yeah, the local Mex-Tex place, isn't it? Right.
And we know even less about, the food of Guatemala, of Argentina. So, I mean, I would say where the next trends are coming is look south.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think you're going to see a real explosion when this is finally over of, people who have been running our kitchens for years saying, no,
Yeah.
now we're going to cook our food. Now we're going to show
Okay.
you what we really eat.
Yeah.
And it will be fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. We have operation in Huaca, and the one time I went down there, I ate very well for a whole week. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
I mean, and what we know about Mexican food is ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean, if you taste, a tortilla that's made out of, real masa, nixtamalized corn, and that's hot and hand patted. I mean, it tastes nothing like what you think a corn tortilla is.
Yeah. Good. Well, thank you for that. That's going to be interesting. Yeah. So our time is up. We've been at it for half an hour. It's really been interesting, Ruth. I appreciate your commentary and your perspective and your insights. I'm taking away several ideas, which I'm going to see if I can get my colleagues to participate in all that. But that's good.
Well,
so thank you for your time.
I appreciate what you do. I mean, I think, Heifer International is a wonderful organization. I'm very grateful for your work. So very happy to meet you virtually.
So are you going to be writing again soon, or you got books coming out, right? You got a couple of books coming. Oh, a book.
No, I am now working full time on this documentary on how.
Oh, a documentary.
On this, how I'm working with a filmmaker in LA, and we're documenting how this pandemic is changing the food system.
Well, so when do you expect to come out with it?
Oh, not till we're on the other side of it. I mean, the whole point is to keep a record of, a daily record, talking to as many people and as broad as a swath of people as we can. So when whatever happens, we know how we got to where we're going.
Okay. Well, I look forward to seeing it. I'm sure we'll hear about it in a year or so, son. Let's hope so. Maybe it'll be a little longer than that. Who knows? But
we're making it as we go along. So as soon as we get there, we should have.
Well, take care. Be safe. Please be safe. And I say to all my guests, wash your hands and wear a mask. Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.